My name's Ulem Ward. I'm a mom. I prepared this just so I wouldn't forget anything, so bear with me. I became passionate about VBACs when I began researching for my last pregnancy. After having 2 prior C-sections, I was initially fearful that another surgery was my only option. After reading several books and countless articles, my husband and I decided that VBAC was our safest option, and then we started looking for a provider, which proved to be extremely challenging. I contacted probably about 4 or 5 different OB offices, and all of which had the reputation of being VBAC friendly. And with no review of my medical history, I was told by all of them that I would not be allowed to have my baby vaginally, solely because of my prior C-sections. I made a prenatal appointment with one office with the hopes that after meeting and discussing my research and answering some of my questions, I would be able to continue my care with her and plan on at least attempting a VBAC. During that appointment, my questions were unwelcome, my concerns were invalidated, her statistics were inaccurate, and she told me that there was no risk to having up to 5 cesareans. At least it would be a controlled cut, she told me. She then told me that I had no choice but to schedule my surgery for 37 weeks to ensure that I did not go into labor, since she would not allow me to would not even allow me to attempt to labor naturally. I was told to go find another doctor, but it was unlikely I would ever find anyone. I left the office in tears. Then I began interviewing midwives. When my husband and I found one team that met all of our criteria, we began planning for a home birth. During the course of my care, I talked with my midwives about all of my concerns. During my hour-long appointments, we discussed all the pros and cons of every decision, but we made those choices together. When it was necessary, I was referred to my primary care provider and other specialists for other issues that came up with the pregnancy. So I'm here today asking that you leave the current system in place. Allow women to do their own research. Allow us to interview midwives and find someone with experience and compassion and a personality that comforts us even in our most vulnerable moments. Someone who understands our bodies and has confidence in us and our abilities to deliver. Allow us to get a clear picture of the risks and benefits and make a true informed decision. Allow us to enter motherhood with the assurance that we can make decisions on behalf of our children and ourselves with the support of medical providers. This is my son, and this is my VBAC baby. You know, I had him at home with my wonderful midwives and OB, Anne Marie and Rebecca. And I tell my story constantly. It is constantly on my mind. I talk about it all the time because it's an experience that is second to none, and it's something that I don't think women should be robbed of. I did not have bad experiences with my cesareans, but I don't think they were necessary. If they were trained to do it the way that my last birth was, I don't think I ever would have had a C-section. And that's unfortunate because the emotions tied to it are very different. You know, obviously I love all of my kids, and all of them are wonderful experiences, and I value them all in different ways. But I feel more confident knowing that I did this and I was able to push him out. You know, it's something that it's hard to describe. So, yeah, just wanted to kind of present the mom perspective, I guess.
I don't want to spend too much more time on the issue of just VBACs unless there's some discussion that needs to occur regarding, because we're not just talking to the people in this room who I know are very committed and conscientious midwives and providers that have the safety of their clients in place. So if there's not comments directed to whether there has to be categories of VBACs that are okay or categories that have to go for referral.
I think that the statistics, I'm Anne Marie Adams, I'm a board-certified OBGYN doing home birth. I think the statistics that have been collected by the board for the last few years in the face of regulations that don't limit or specify which VBACs can be performed indicate that we have licensed practitioners who are concerned about the safety of women and refer when need to. And I think to limit their, we're licensing them for a reason. They have studied for a reason. And then we're saying you don't have the intelligence to determine when something is out of your scope. And I think that's wrong. So I think there should be no specific, there does not need to be a specific limitation.
I agree. I again believe that I and my colleagues are licensed professionals and capable of knowing when to refer. I don't think this list is really, much of it is that necessary for that reason. And in fact, what it does mainly is place a burden on our clients to spend the time and money for a consultation, and in fact places a burden on the obstetricians they're consulting as well to make a very difficult decision between what they may feel adds to their own liability if they give any language or write anything down, as Faith said, that might make a woman feel that a home birth is okay, which may lead to women going to their doctors not telling them that they're planning a home birth, but trying to just have this conversation and elicit the response that they want, that this isn't necessarily going to be a problem, so that they can then take that record and go to have a home birth. And this is really not needing the kind of collaborative care that some of these women may end up needing. However, I do understand that there's going to be a process that will probably hammer out some kind of compromise about how many prior incisions, how other things like that. And so I'd like to throw my 2 cents in that I think many midwives feel that a woman who has previously given birth vaginally after a cesarean should definitely not have to consult a physician. We have clients who have their first baby by cesarean or their first 2 babies by cesarean and have gone on to have 2, 4, or 6 VBACs and are still told by obstetricians that they are not candidates for VBAC because they're petite or because they had large babies or for any other reason, simply because VBAC is not supported by that doctor or that hospital. And I think that forcing those women, no matter what their history is, if they have had a VBAC, to go in for a consultation is totally unreasonable.
And I'd also like to say, in terms of higher order VBACs, the research available on VBAC after 3 or more cesareans is virtually non-existent. I mean, when we look at the studies, there might be 89 women included in the study. Well, we know that that's not sufficient to measure any sort of mortality, and it's very difficult to get hard numbers on any sort of morbidity when we're looking at such a small sample population. So that is an unknown level of risk on one hand. And on the other hand, we have very good data of studies looking at up to 30,000 women, looking at the risks of multiple repeat cesarean sections, and we know that those risks increase. And so women are ultimately forced to weigh their options between an unknown level of risk and a known level of risk that only increases with each cesarean. And how one woman evaluates that information might be very different than another, which is why it's important for them to be able to make that decision for themselves, being cognizant of their ultimate family size that they're planning for, and also being aware that there is a 49% unintended pregnancy rate in the United States per the CDC. And so it's very likely that when we look at women who've had prior cesareans, that they may get pregnant again unintentionally, and then they really need to start looking at how did my prior birth choices, or what when I felt like I had no choice, how does that impact the complications for my baby now and myself now, per the Accreta statistics? And there's a whole host of other complications: cesarean hysterectomy, postpartum hemorrhage requiring a blood transfusion, placenta previa, and also operative time, adhesions, the long-term implications of having adhesions and how that's tied into infertility, bowel obstructions, things that can impact women's health for decades after they're done with their childbearing. So it's important to be aware, unknown level of risk versus known level of risk. And who should be able to make that decision? Well, it should be the woman in consultation with her licensed medical provider, whether that's a doctor or a midwife. But she should still have that option of a vaginal delivery, because I think we can all be in agreement that if a woman wants 8 babies, it's probably best for her to not have 8 cesareans, given the information that we have about the increasing risks that come with each and every cesarean.
Sarah Davis with the California Association of Midwives. I'd like to return for a second to the airplane analogy. And we pointed out that the woman may not be able to get on another plane, but we haven't pointed out that she can't just not fly. You know, like, the baby has to come out. So it's sort of, we've alluded to it when you're choosing between risks, but you know, the analogy doesn't really work. You could go through and say, well, okay, if she was on the one prior cesarean plane, then like this alternate plane would have this lower level of risk of this. You can get into it, but you can't just get off the plane. And an unintended pregnancy is a huge issue when you're looking at downstream complications from first or second cesareans or third or fourth. So for our position on this, understanding that there ultimately is going to be some kind of discussion and compromise, we're happy to respond to anything that ACOG may come up with on this issue. But we feel that the last 6 years of statistics and all of the years prior without statistics have shown that midwives have been able to do good client selection with VBACs. Most midwives attend VBACs with one prior cesarean. Beyond that, midwives have a variety of levels of comfort with higher order multiples. There are so many factors that one can look into about predicting the success or the vaginal birth rate after a cesarean that, like what Rachel mentioned, is very helpful, but it's not necessarily going to be helpful for us to list in regulation a whole laundry list of sub-issues around VBAC. You mentioned prior VBAC, but there's also prior vaginal birth period. Maybe she had one prior to the cesarean. There are all kinds of things. There's VBAC calculators online. You can just plug in and find a percentage. There's so many issues that someone bothered to make a calculator for it. Not that I'm not saying that it's accurate. I'm just saying there's so many things that go into it. So we're fine with the, relying on trained midwives' experience and expertise in client selection on VBAC, but we're also absolutely willing to respond to proposed limitations as well.
Okay. So, I appreciate everyone's thoughtful comments on this issue. Obviously, there were a number of other items that were listed to help put parameters around 2507B1A. And again, this is any pre-existing maternal disease or condition likely to affect the pregnancy. And we had 35 items on there. I did receive an update from Pam with a spreadsheet, and I understand that there were agreements reached on a few of those items, but any update from ACOG, any comments on any other subject other than VBAC that is a particular concern?
Well, we have had 2 phone conferences with council. I don't remember everybody that was on the call, but several ACOG folks and several midwives. And we did come to some agreement about some of the language, but we've never seen that document. So I'm reluctant to say that ACOG agrees with whatever's in the document because we've never seen it. So
this was just for my benefit in asking how are things going.
So we had a good discussion and reviewed a number of these items and agreed that perhaps the wording could be changed or some could be dropped. But again, I've not seen any document. I don't think anybody from ACOG has seen any of the document that came out of those several hours of phone conferences.
Could I clarify?
Sure.
Rosanna Davis, California Association of Midwives. So during the conference call, Cam took notes on our conversation, and we asked if it was okay with them to submit the notes, and they said that they would like to submit their own notes. So we've submitted our notes. So that's the document that she's referring to. Just notes from our conversation.
I don't recall that we were going to submit our own notes, but I thought, my understanding was that we would be seeing a copy of that before this meeting, so give us some point of reference.
Yeah, any objection to running a copy of this?
Sure,
for the
yeah.
ACOG folks? I'm separating the pages.
Let me double check it.
Yes. Copies for everyone. Well, before Anne Marie heads out, here's what I'm suggesting, and obviously I'm open to other methods of handling this. But I can, you're welcome to have a copy of this now. I can rewrite the language pursuant to what's already been agreed upon. And honestly, there aren't that many things that have been affirmatively agreed upon. But then that would be a reference point to what our next meeting will be focusing on. Because unless ACOG and CAM and the other members of the community are ready to reach agreements today on some of those other items, I don't know how productive we're going to be. So, what does everyone think?
So what I recall from what Rosanna gave you is there's only maybe 4 or 5, or maybe 3 points that we didn't come to agreement on the phone. And again, to give ACOG an opportunity to review that list, but maybe we could go to those at least.
Okay. And maybe once the chart is passed out, you can help guide us, so, because I wasn't clear that there had been so many agreements made. So, okay.
Yeah, point of clarification there, to the part B of the list, you'll notice there aren't any notes.
Right.
That's because we didn't disagree on most of that.
Okay, I got you. Well, that's wonderful. We're much farther ahead. Yeah, let's does everyone have the list of the language that I had initially been put up for discussion?
From the counter? From the counter.
Okay, so that's the language I put up. Okay.